The day after the Spanish Grand Prix, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships opened in London, with world number 2 John McEnroe playing Tom Gullickson. McEnroe's enraged response to one of the umpire's calls would go down in history.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. How can you possibly call that out?
In that year's women's tournament, Chris Evert-Lloyd powered to the title without losing a single set, the first woman since Billie Jean King in 1967 to achieve this. Over in Yugoslavia, 6 young people claim to have seen visions of the Virgin Mary in the small village of Medjugorje, now in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Although the Catholic Church has never officially acknowledged them, a few years after the reports, Pope John Paul II did approve the idea of making pilgrimages to the area. Meanwhile, in the US, the Lighthouse Gospel Tract Foundation in Arizona predicted the date of the end of the world to be Sunday, June the 28th, but when this came and went, the prediction was revised to August the 7th. The closest Israeli general election in history so far saw Menachem Begin's right-wing Likud party retain power despite a projected rout, just 3 weeks after the Air Force's preemptive strike on an Iraqi nuclear power plant suspected of making weapons-grade plutonium. While all this was going on, the Formula One teams were having a round of impromptu musical chairs. Jean-Pierre Jabouille decided he simply didn't have the pace anymore and elected to retire from driving, moving into the management structure at Ligier, and was replaced with Patrick Tambay. Teddy Yip, by all accounts delighted at his boy getting a shot at the big time, signed the recently unemployed Marc Sierra to replace him. Meanwhile, over at Ozella, Giorgio Francia had a prior commitment, and the team, unwilling or unable to find yet another number 2 driver, decided to just run Gabbiani. The tyre situation was made interesting too, with the return of Goodyear. When they'd pulled out over the winter, Michelin had stepped up to provide everyone with production tyres on a temporary basis, but now the tyre war was back on, they reverted to only supplying racing tyres to their previously contracted teams, Renault, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo and Ligier. Goodyear were only interested in supplying Williams and Brabham, so for the rest there was an anxious bit of wheeler dealing before the race. Eventually, Michelin were prevailed upon to supply Lotus, McLaren and Tyrrell with their race tyres, March and Theodore signed up for new Avon tyres, Tollman were already running Pirellis anyway, and the rest had to buy the production Michelins and hope to organise something better soon. Interest in Formula One in France had seldom been higher, with 2 all-French teams, Renault and Ligier, among the front runners, and the iconic Ferrari fielding 1 French and 1 French-Canadian driver to boot. The only fly in the ointment was the absence of Jabouille, who had taken Renault's first win at the fast-sweeping Prenoir circuit. However, if the fans were disappointed, they were soon assuaged when the Renaults looked much better in practice than they had been so far this season, and René Arnoux took pole position and Prost 3rd. Between them was John Watson's McLaren, another car looking much better here than previously, with De Cesaris also going well in 5th, just behind Piquet. Lafitte was 6th in the first Ligier, Tambay could only manage 16th, but the Ferraris were distinctly lacklustre, with Villeneuve 11th and Pironi 14th. At the back, the Tollmans were also making progress. They still hadn't qualified, but Brian Henton did set a faster time than Borgud, Gabbiani and his teammate Warwick, despite a bout of food poisoning earlier in the weekend. These 4, plus Siegfried Storr, would be the unlucky 5 to miss Sunday's race. So would Chico Serra, it turned out, as he crashed his Fittipaldi in the warm-up, and the spare car was also out of service with a bad engine. Qualifying and practice had seen rain, clouds and wind, and, despite the sun being out by Sunday lunchtime, there were some nasty-looking clouds on the horizon as the cars lined up on the grid. The red lights came on, but so did the green ones, both appearing together and flickering. Rather than abort the starter simply slapped the green button, cancelling the reds and starting the race. A thoroughly discombobulated Arnoux was slow to react, but Piquet wasn't, scrambling between the Renault and Watson's McLaren to take the lead, while further back Villeneuve got a scorcher, jumping from 11th to 5th. Alan Jones was another who had a bad start following the botched light sequence and bent a steering rod on Andretti's Alfa. By the end of lap 1, Piquet was already pulling out a lead from Watson, with Prost 3rd, De Cesaris 4th, Villeneuve 5th and Lafitte 6th, with Arnoux 9th with it all to do. Prost overtook Watson on lap 3 and set off after Piquet, after which the race settled down into something of a procession, though Hector Ibaque was providing some entertainment by picking his way through the midfield from 15th, while Reutemann had fought his way up to 4th, only to be passed by Jones, 3 laps down after having his steering fixed and on a mission, and dropped back with a blistered tyre. 20 laps in, and it was Piquet by a country mile from Prost, who was almost as far ahead of Watson. Reutemann clung on to 4th, Arnoux had battled back up to 5th, Villeneuve was 6th, with Lafitte and de Cesaris scrapping over 7th, and Pironi trying to keep an inspired Rebaque behind him. It didn't work, and by lap 30, the Mexican had got up to 7th. Piquet was having trouble in traffic with a sticking throttle, but Prost wasn't able to capitalise as he was also having gremlins, having lost 4th gear. Watson closed up on the pair, but that was it for interest. Until lap 54, when the looming clouds started to drop rain on the circuit. Within minutes there was a torrential downpour, and when Piquet tiptoed across the line to complete lap 58, the race was red flagged. The rain stopped almost as soon as it had started, and the sun came back out, drying the track pretty quickly, so a restart was called to run the remaining 22 laps. With less than 75% distance run, the race had to be either restarted or abandoned, awarding half points. The results of the race would be decided not on track position at the end of the 22 laps, but on the aggregate times across both parts of the race. And now it would all come down to tyres. The Goodyear runners, including Piquet, had only hard full race compounds, but Michelin had a tyre for every occasion, and Prost would have softer tyres. The various gremlins, Prost's gearbox, Piquet's throttle, Reutemann's tyre blister, were also fixed, and the cars lined up as they had been in the race, except for poor de Cesaris, who'd come into the pits to change to wet tyres just as the race was red flagged, and would start from the pit lane, dropping in from 8th to 14th. When the restart was taken, Piquet could do nothing but watch his lead evaporate as Prost, Watson, Arnoux and Pironi disappeared into the distance on their soft sprint tyres, and that was the order they finished after a rather dull 22-lap encore. Piquet had had enough of a lead to hang on to an aggregate 3rd, but he might well look miffed on the podium. Not miffed at all, though, was Alain Prost, who took his first career win at his home race in an all-French car. He and the fans were delighted, even if it had rather fallen into his lap. John Watson looked quietly satisfied with second place too, another good result for McLaren after all their hard work. Arnoux, Pironi and De Angelis made up the minor point scoring places, with Mansell 7th, Andretti 8th, and Rebaque 9th, and probably as disappointed as Piquet after all his efforts this afternoon. Reutemann, another one on hard tyres, finished 10th, allowing Piquet to close up a little in the title race, while Renault climbed above Ligier in the Constructors' Championship.